Canada is the second largest country on Earth. Nearly 10 million square kilometers of land. So why do almost all of its people live in a thin strip along the bottom? Because the real reason isn't cold weather. It's something built into the land itself, and it's been there for over 3 billion years. On a map, Canada looks like unlimited space. And technically, it is. It stretches 5,500 kilometers east to west and 4,600 north to south. But in reality, nearly 80% of all Canadians live within 150 kilometers of the U.S. border. Canada has 40 million people. The United Kingdom fits 69 million into a space the size of a single Canadian province. In population density, Canada ranks 230th in the world. Most people assume the answer is simple. It's too cold. But that doesn't hold up. Norway, Sweden, and Finland all support thriving populations in similar climates. Iceland built an entire economy on a volcanic island near the Arctic Circle. Even Russia maintains major cities far further north than most Canadian towns. Cold alone doesn't stop a country from being livable. So what actually makes Canada different? Something underneath the surface. Literally. The answer starts with something most people have never heard of. The Canadian Shield. A massive geological formation that covers roughly half of the entire country. Around 5 million square kilometers. This land is ancient, over 3 billion years old. Mountains once stood here, possibly the tallest the planet has ever produced. But over billions of years they eroded completely, leaving behind a flat, scraped-out landscape of exposed bedrock, thin soil, and tens of thousands of lakes. And that thin soil is the critical problem. The bedrock sits too close to the surface. There isn't enough depth for roots, not enough nutrients for large-scale agriculture, and not enough stable ground for dense infrastructure. So already a huge portion of Canada isn't just empty. It's structurally resistant to development. The rock itself won't allow it. Now go further north, past the Shield, and the situation gets worse. Canada's 3 northern territories, Yukon, the Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, together cover over 40% of the country's total land area. Nunavut alone is nearly as large as Mexico. Its population, around 40,000. Fewer people than a small suburban town. The reason is permafrost. Permanently frozen ground, in some places hundreds of meters deep. And when permafrost thaws, which is happening more frequently, the ground shifts. Buildings tilt. Roads collapse. Foundations crack apart. Construction costs in these regions run 5 to 10 times higher than in the south. And the growing season is so short, sometimes just weeks, that almost everything has to be flown in. Food, fuel, building materials. All of it. So now it's not just geologically difficult. It's economically irrational to even try. Now compare all of that to where Canadians actually live. The southern strip has deeper soil, better drainage, and longer growing seasons. This narrow corridor carries almost the entire population, because it's one of the few places where the land actually cooperates. The densest population runs from just east of Detroit through Quebec to the Maritime provinces. A second band stretches from Winnipeg to the base of the Rockies. Between those two clusters, across most of Ontario, the Canadian Shield sits like a wall, keeping the country split. But geography didn't just decide where Canadians couldn't live. It decided where they had to. When European settlers arrived in the 1500s, they didn't spread out across the land. They followed water, specifically the St. Lawrence River. The St. Lawrence connects the Atlantic to the Great Lakes, a natural highway stretching nearly 4,000 kilometers into the continent. It became the route for fur traders, missionaries, and waves of immigration. Montreal and Quebec City were both founded directly on this river, because it was the only practical way to move people and goods inland. And here's what made this so decisive. The United States had an entire network of navigable rivers. The Mississippi, the Missouri, the Ohio, all flowing into each other and connecting vast stretches of fertile land. That system created enormous wealth across the American interior. Canada's rivers mostly flow north, into the Arctic. Useless for trade with the outside world. The St. Lawrence was essentially the only viable corridor. So everyone clustered along it. Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, Quebec City. Canada's biggest cities all sit along this single water route. Not by coincidence, by necessity. And once that pattern was established, it reinforced itself. Cities attract infrastructure. Infrastructure attracts business. Business attracts people. And the cycle repeats. Canada's immigration system actively directs newcomers to its major southern cities. Not because the government wants the north to stay empty, but because there's nowhere else with the capacity to absorb them. So instead of expanding north, Canada doubled down on the south. Over and over. Until the population distribution became one of the most concentrated in the world. The country isn't choosing to ignore 90% of its land. The economics simply make it irrational to fight what the geography already decided. And it's important to understand, these northern regions were never truly empty. Indigenous communities have lived across this land for thousands of years. First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples have deep ties to these territories, cultural, spiritual, and practical. But their way of life is adapted to the land. Not based on dense cities, industrial agriculture, or massive infrastructure grids, which reinforces the same reality. The land sets the limits. It always has. So when you look at Canada on a map, you're seeing size. But when you look at how people actually live, you're seeing constraints. Geology, climate, water routes, economics, all quietly deciding where life at scale is even possible. Toronto is closer to New York City than it is to most of its own country. That single fact tells you everything about how Canada actually functions. And this shapes more than just population. Canada's economy, its politics, its military positioning, even its relationship with the United States, all of it traces back to this geographic reality. The vast majority of Canadians live closer to American cities than to their own northern territories. Canada looks like a giant on the map. But functionally, it operates as a long, thin corridor pressed against its southern neighbor. Canada isn't empty by accident. It's shaped by 3-billion-year-old rock, permanently frozen ground, a single river that determined where an entire nation took root, and an economic cycle that locked it all in place. The geography came first. The people followed the only path it allowed. And once you see that, the map never looks the same again.